So what if I told you that the secret to a smarter, more effective team isn't harmony, all the kumbaya and high fives? What if the key to a team actually knowing how well it's doing is, well, tension, friction, and maybe even a little bit of animosity? I know it sounds completely backward, but a really fascinating study suggests that the very thing we all try to eliminate from our teams might be the one thing that makes them more accurate. All right, let's get into this.
First off, let's be super clear about what we're talking about here. This is not some healthy debate about a project. No, this is what researcher Karen Jen calls relationship conflict, and it's personal. It's that friction, that feeling of annoyance? The stuff that makes you just grit your teeth in a meeting. It is literally the opposite of team cohesion.
Everything we've ever learned, right? Business school, team building retreats, it all tells us to stamp this stuff out immediately. This is supposed to be the sign of a team that's about to completely fall apart. But the big question we're tackling here is pretty wild. What if that friction, that personal stuff, is actually the secret ingredient that helps a team see itself with brutal, objective clarity?
Now, to understand why conflict might be this kind of secret weapon, we first have to talk about a fundamental and, let's be honest, kind of humbling human flaw. It's a problem that affects every single one of us on every team we're a part of, and it's called the self-assessment problem.
To put it bluntly, we're terrible at judging our own work. Just awful. It's a deep, deep cognitive bias. We all want to believe we're doing a great job, and our brains are basically wired to be our own personal hype men, protecting our egos. We tend to remember all our wins in glorious detail and just conveniently let the failures fade away. This isn't just a guess. It's one of the most well-documented things in all of psychology.
So how bad is it really? Well, check out this number. A massive meta-analysis which looked at 166 different studies tried to figure out the actual connection between how well people think they're doing and their actual objective performance. And the result? 11.56%. That's it. That is the entire overlap.
Just let that sink in for a second. It means that nearly 90% of our self-perception, when it comes to how we're doing, is basically fiction. It's built on ego, on hope, on bias, but not on what's actually happening. So if we're this bad at judging ourselves as individuals, imagine what happens when we get together in a team.
So a group of researchers decided to find out. They put together this really clever experiment to see how this whole self-assessment bias plays out in a team, and more importantly, what, if anything, could help a team break through it.
Okay, here's the setup. They took 156 students and split them up randomly into 52 three-person teams. Now this next part is crucial. The members were all strangers. This was done on purpose to make sure there were no pre-existing friendships or office politics involved. Their job? To act like an entrepreneurial team and pick the single best business opportunity out of 4 different choices.
But this wasn't some simple task. The researchers used something called a hidden profile challenge, which is a fantastic way to test pure information sharing. You see, each person on the team was only given a piece of the puzzle. Nobody had enough information on their own to see the right answer. The only way to succeed was for everyone to share every little bit of unique info they had and put it all together as a group.
So here's a look at how they actually designed this trap. For the 3 wrong choices, every single person saw 3 positive facts. So on their own, those options looked really attractive. But for the 1 correct choice, each person only saw 2 negative facts. All the really good stuff about the right answer and all the really bad stuff about the wrong answers was split up and hidden across the team. So any team that didn't communicate perfectly was almost guaranteed to pick the wrong option. So after all the teams made their choices, the researchers measured 2 key things: their objective performance, did they actually pick the right answer, and their self-assessed performance, how well did they think they did. They also measured the level of relationship conflict in each team. And this, my friends, is where things got really weird.
This gets us to the absolute core of it. Which teams had a more accurate view of how they did? Was it the teams that worked together like a well-oiled machine? The ones who felt great about their collaboration? You'd think so, right? But the answer was a huge nope.
That's right. It was the teams that had more tension, more animosity, more of that interpersonal friction. The teams that just didn't get along as well were way better at knowing whether they had actually succeeded or failed. This finding just completely flew in the face of everything we think we know about good teamwork.
And we're not talking about a small effect here. This chart really shows you the core finding. For the teams with low conflict, the connection between what they really did and what they thought they did was super weak. They were totally lost in that 90% delusion. But for the teams with high relationship conflict, that connection was much, much stronger. Their self-assessment was actually tied to reality. That friction, somehow, was creating clarity.
But why? I mean, how on earth could being annoyed at your coworkers make your team smarter about itself? It seems crazy. Well, the researchers pointed to two powerful psychological theories that help explain this bizarre and fascinating result.
So the two big ideas are breaking down bias and creating distance. On the one hand, conflict is like a pin that pops the happy bubble of group optimism. And on the other, it actually forces team members to emotionally step back from the group, which gives them this more objective, almost an outsider's point of view. Let's break those down.
The first theory is called depressive realism. And yeah, it sounds a little grim, right? But the idea has been around since the 70s, and it suggests that negative emotions can actually strip away the rose-colored glasses we all tend to wear. Those bad vibes from relationship conflict, they pop that bubble of irrational optimism and self-hype that most groups naturally fall into.
The original researchers, Alloy and Abramson, they summed it up perfectly with this one phrase, sadder but wiser. In the context of these teams, the members who were feeling that conflict, they weren't happy. But that unhappiness made them way more realistic and ultimately more accurate in judging their team's performance.
Okay, the second big theory is all about psychological distance. This is basically our ability to mentally step back and see a situation from a more abstract, big-picture perspective. You know, when you feel really tight with your team, a strong sense of belonging, you're actually too close to see it objectively. But that relationship conflict, it breaks that bond. It kind of pushes you away emotionally. Think of it like this. Feeling connected to your team is like being an actor on stage. You're right in the thick of it, totally caught up in your lines and what's happening right in front of you. But experiencing conflict, that's like being forced into a seat in the back of the theater. You become emotionally detached, and suddenly you can see the whole production, the lighting, the set, the way the story is flowing, so much more clearly. That distance creates objectivity.
So what do we do with all this? Does this mean we should all go into work tomorrow and start picking fights with our colleagues just to get better performance reviews? I mean, of course not, right? The real lesson here is way more interesting and useful than that.
When you really boil it down, the lesson isn't that we need the conflict itself, but we desperately need what the conflict produces. We need ways to get to that brutal honesty, something that can pierce through that natural tendency for groupthink and over-optimism. And we need to build in moments of objective distance to encourage people to step back and look at the team's work as if they were an outsider.
And that leaves us with one final, really powerful question to think about. I want you to consider your own teams, at work, in school, even a personal project. How can you create a culture that has that sadder but wiser realism of conflict and that clear-eyed perspective of psychological distance, but without all the toxic damage? Because finding that balance, that might just be the true secret to a team that not only performs well, but actually knows it.